There are many things that can affect a console's launch, but possibly the most important thing is to get your launch lineup in place. We've seen games launch consoles and become instant classics, but not all launch games are this lucky. For every Wii Sports or Halo, there's plenty of launch games that have faded away more than Steve Brookstein. Hello viewers, it's good to see you. I'm Will from Cultured Vultures, and these are the launch titles that time forgot. Crime Crackers was a launch game for the PlayStation in Japan, making its debut in 1994. A first-person dungeon crawling game with RPG mechanics. It was definitely a unique game, considering the previous generation's reliance on platformers and fighting games. Crime Crackers saw players take on a team of 3 individuals as they move through grid-based environments, while taking on turn-based battles and some light puzzle solving. The PlayStation was not only looking to set itself apart from the previous generation, but also from other 5th generation consoles such as the Jaguar, 3DO, and Sony's main rival, the Sega Saturn. Crime Crackers was a unique and quirky game that would have stood out against the competition. Sadly, Crime Crackers never left Japan, which of course limited its international following. However, it didn't do a whole lot better natively either, where it received reviews that would be generally described as mixed. It didn't help that developers rushed to push the console's limits more and more, and Crime Crackers was seemingly forgotten in the avalanche of games that released in the following years. It did well enough to receive a sequel in Crime Crackers 2, but competing with the likes of Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, and Final Fantasy VII, well, Crime Crackers never quite cracked it. And that's a crime. Maybe a misdemeanor. Not even Branson's could improve this next cracker. That's one to confuse the Americans there, but it is imperative you stick with us. Over to the PS1 stateside for Kileak, the DNA Imperative, which has absolutely nothing to do with your cheesiest friend's favourite Soul Calibur character. A North American launch title when the console belatedly made its way to the West in 1995, Kileak was an early attempt to bring the first-person shooter to the PlayStation. The story was very mid-90s, involving biological experiments gone horribly wrong. Will we ever seek not to play God? Will we ever learn? Players pilot a sort of mech as they make their way around labyrinthian corridors fighting robotic enemies and uncovering the dark secrets of the facility the game takes place in. While I am not giving this a strong sell, it was a unique game. While many other FPS games focused on Doom-style gameplay, what we'd call boomer shooters today, Kileak was a slower experience based around atmosphere and exploration. For a launch title, it was a great way to show off the PlayStation's ability to handle 3D environments. Unfortunately, Kileak sounds more like a malfunction in a submarine door, and it was about as fun. Sure, it demonstrated 3D capabilities well, but it was slow, clunky, and repetitive. Its narrow, featureless corridors lacked visual variety even in 1995, and it simply wasn't exciting or engaging. We have seen FPS games on console before this, even had great ones. We're blowing kisses at you, Alien vs Predator, the only reason to own a Jaguar, but overall, first-person games on consoles were still in their infancy, and Kileak showed that. Considering only a few years later we'd see the likes of GoldenEye 007 on the N64 just goes to show how quickly games were moving forward, and Kileak's dated design was easily eclipsed. Kileak's sequel, Epidemic, also known as Kileak The Blood 2 Reason in Madness, was an improvement but didn't exactly set the world on fire. We'd also get a spiritual successor in the fantastically named Brahma Force Assault on Beltlogger 9, but as there's no one calling for Beltlogger 10, I guess this series has been long forgotten. It would be an uphill battle to keep logging my belt collection. I have so many. Yeah, I can already hear you in the comments typing, Battle Arena Toshinden isn't a forgotten game, it's a cult classic that fans still love. But let's take into account that the last proper Toshinden game, Toshinden 4, was released in 1999. There are people in this world today that are old enough to perform brain surgery that have been born since the last game in the series. There are probably more gamers that do not know Toshinden than do. Hand me my painkillers and back brace, please. Battle Arena Toshinden was a launch game for the PlayStation in both the US and Europe. It was a good but not great 3D fighting game, which many would claim to be one of the few true 3D fighters. That's right, Toshinden wasn't just 3D polygonal characters on a 2D plane, as you could actually move around your opponent using the shoulder buttons to avoid attacks and get the drop on your opponent. It also had a good cast of characters with some nice design and would receive rave reviews and sell over 1 million copies. Despite only making its debut in 1995, Toshinden would see a quick turnaround in sequels following its initial success. 1 year later, the PS1 would see Battle Arena Toshinden 2, and despite being fairly similar to its predecessor, would only sell about half the amount of copies. Battle Arena Toshinden 3 landed less than a year on and would again sell less than half the copies of Toshinden 2. And finally, Toshinden 4 would be given a bit more dev time and release in 1999, but it would make little impact, with sales numbers never formally being announced. Despite several spin-offs prior to Toshinden 4's release, the series would come to a near halt in 1999. There was a weirdly kawaii Wii reimagining simply called Toshinden years later, but it was so different it felt like a different game with the Toshinden branding slapped on. Weird reimaginings in the 7th generation seemed to come out like clockwork. That's enough about Sony for a minute. There are plenty of other consoles out there during the 5th generation. Clockwork Knight was a release title for the Sega Saturn, making its debut alongside the console in May of 1995 in North America. A side-scrolling platformer, players take the role of a toy knight named Pepper and fight their way through household-based levels against other toy enemies. Clockwork Knight used the power of the Saturn to use high-quality 3D rendered sprites, a la Donkey Kong Country, alongside some nice-looking 3D graphics on a 2D plane. It was received well by critics and generally got good reviews, so good in fact that Clockwork Knight would receive a sequel only months later, with Clockwork Knight 2 getting a Japanese release in July of 1995, which also got good reviews. So what went wrong? Hard to say really. Sales data wasn't really released back in the 90s, so it's difficult to know how well Clockwork Knight actually did. One thing that is for sure was the 2D platformer was on borrowed time in the mainstream, with 3D platformers coming to the fore. 2D platformers felt dated, and Clockwork Knight's design didn't help this. Only a few months later the Saturn would get Bug, and while not a full 3D platformer, it would allow you to move in more than two directions. Simply moving left to right was old hat, and while Clockwork Knight was certainly a looker and holds up well today, there's a reason why we never got Clockwork Knight and the Secret Rings, or even Clockwork Knight Rise of Lyric. Add in the fact that the Sega Saturn was hardly a smash hit, there's no surprise that Clockwork Knight missed a trick. The certain aesthetic that the Dreamcast embodies still looks great today. Those clunky, clean polygons left quite an impression, one that no other console has ever really emulated. Sadly, when it launched in 1999, aiming to fix some of the mistakes of the Saturn and the 6 million Mega Drive add-ons, it did so in the middle of PlayStation fever. The console had taken the world by storm, and gamers were still enjoying the PS1 while waiting for the PS2, which meant that many of its decent launch lineup could have made this list. We settled on Trickstyle for our choice, an original hoverboard racing game with a stylized name that absolutely dared dyslexic people to try their very best. The sci-fi racer set players on futuristic tracks located in real-world inspired locations such as London and Tokyo. Those trademark graphics oozed style and was a technical showcase for the Dreamcast. It also helped that this game was developed by Criterion Games, who would later go on to create the Burnout series. We've talked about that one a few times. Despite its design and technical excellence, Trickstyle proved a little too shallow. While fun, the game lacked depth and replayability. The short lifespan of the Dreamcast also didn't help Trickstyle's chances of building up a fanbase, and with the PlayStation and Xbox both becoming dominant players in the gaming market, Trickstyle, as well as the Dreamcast, died a sorry death. However, you don't need to sleep on Trickstyle, you can still live out your Marty McFly fantasies, as the game actually debuted on Steam to seemingly zero fanfare back in 2017 and cost less than a $5. Judging by reviews, it hasn't been a success on Steam either, but it really is a fun game and you should give it a go. Though obviously it's not going to give a game like SSX a run for its money. This may shock and surprise all 4 of our younger viewers. Please, give us your knee cartilage, we need it. But there was a time that Rockstar Games created more than just GTA Online content. Back in 2000, Angel Studios, which would later go on to become Rockstar San Diego, alongside with publisher Rockstar, would release Smuggler's Run as an ideal launch game for the long-awaited PlayStation 2. Smuggler's Run was the perfect launch game for the PlayStation 2, with an expansive open world and fast-paced gameplay. There were 3 maps, 3 different game modes, and 32 missions to complete over the course of the campaign. It was very well received due to its open form gameplay, something that was relatively new to console gaming at the time. So why does no one speak of Smuggler's Run, you ask? Well, the world has simply moved on. It's hard to describe how quickly the gaming world was moving around the turn of the century, but it moved fast, and open worlds would quickly become more and more complex, which left the fairly basic world of Smuggler's Run behind, despite how impressive it was at the time. Rockstar would soon launch Grand Theft Auto 3, which revolutionized the open world gameplay experience and become the gold standard for the genre. Quite simply, there was no need to go back to the fairly basic, empty worlds of Smuggler's Run and its sequel. Rockstar focused on more complex open world fare as the years went on, such as Bully and Red Dead Redemption, and Smuggler's Run faded into obscurity. We've got a quite rarefied twofer for you here, as Cell Damage not only crawled its way onto Bill Gates and The Rock's adopted son, the obelisk known as the OG Xbox, but it also struggled when it coincided with the launch of the Nintendo GameCube too. There are probably quite a few of you doing that Leonardo DiCaprio thing.
Okay, walking's out.
No, not that one. This one. Upon hearing the name Cell Damage, it's a pretty small club, but it's a proud one, as even in 2025, Cell Damage is one of the most eye-catching car games out there. Playing like a mix of Looney Tunes, Twisted Metal and Mario Kart, Cell Damage was vehicular car combat mixed with kart racing. You're playing in front of a live studio audience, who will all react accordingly when you blow up your mate with weapons of mass destruction from the Acme Armory, like a vacuum and a nuclear device. Fun! Unfortunately, Cell Damage can be a little bit cheesy when it comes to the AI, and just how much stuff can come flying your way at once. Imagine the blue shell in Mario Kart, except all the time, and you can't get your younger brother in a rear naked chokehold to get him to cut out that shit. Poor critical reception, as well as how many racing games were released early on the OG Xbox, contributed to Cell Damage being a pretty hard sell. It did come to the PS2 in 2002 though, which is where it found most of its audience, like Jimmy. Say hello, Jimmy.
Hello, Jimmy. Please subscribe so I can keep my family in custard creams, please.
However, it sold poorly overall, and plans for a sequel went untold. Check out Liam Roberts' video for more on that failed sequel, but for now we've got to focus on another game whose story also remained untold. See, that was a pretty smooth segue, alright? Untold Legends Dark Kingdom was a dungeon crawler RPG launch game for the PlayStation 3, releasing alongside other huge-hitting PS3 titles such as, another game we'll get to later. Much like other games in this genre, you choose a character class and make your way through dungeons, defeating enemies and gaining experience. Each class, naturally, plays differently and lets you change things up. It also features co-op multiplayer, so you and your D&D loving pals can team up to take on dungeons together. It was one of the few games, let alone RPGs, available at launch, and I'm sure that Sony hoped that it would fill a niche for RPG fans looking to jump to the PS3 early. But being one of the first doesn't necessarily mean being one of the best, as Untold Legends was held back by linear gameplay, generic design, and lackluster execution. Repetitive gameplay, unimpressive combat, and forgettable level design all failed to take advantage of the PS3's impressive hardware. Critics gave the game mixed reviews at best, and it totally failed to resonate with fans, and the PS3 would quickly, well, quickly-ish get some more impressive games over the next year. As time rolled on, RPG fans would get the likes of Dragon Age and Diablo 3, and in comparison, Dark Kingdom was totally unable to distinguish itself. It didn't help that the PS3's high launch cost put off many early adopters, and by the time they did buy one, Untold Legends Dark Kingdom was deep in the bargain bin. The PlayStation 2 was Sony's biggest success in the console market, and it probably always will be. To this day, it's the biggest selling console of all time. So you can imagine it had a fairly thick library of games. Some big hitters that changed gaming, some stinkers that you'd only find in the grimiest of Woolworths, and some meh. But you can't spell meh without Genji Days of the Blade. The original Genji on PS2 was an action-adventure game with a focus on Japanese history and mythology, with plenty of hacking and slashing to give you your monkey brain fix. Genji Dawn of the Samurai was well received, and you definitely will have seen that pretty cool cover on store shelves over 20 years ago. Sony felt that it could have franchise potential, and earmarked a sequel to debut on Sony's big follow-up, the PlayStation 3. It's a familiar story at this point. Genji Days of the Blade was not as well received as its prequel, with reviews generally being mixed. With an uptick in power of the PlayStation 3, the graphics were impressive, but Days of the Blade suffered from a frustrating camera and clunky combat. There were also a couple of other issues at play which may have caused this game to be completely forgotten. As proved with the PlayStation 5 Pro, Sony does love good, exceedingly expensive hardware. At release, the PlayStation 3 cost an eye-watering $500 to $600, depending on if you wanted the 20 or 60 gigabyte versions. This probably caused a few gamers to steer clear of the PS3 until prices dropped a little bit. Genji Days of the Blade was more like Genji OKs of the Blade, and you were never going to rush out to buy it after remortgaging your house for all those sick SD slots. Also, gamers may have not taken Genji too seriously, thanks to that iconic giant enemy crab at E3 2006. My god, was that really 38 years ago? Where has the time gone? Not all forgotten launch games are for consoles that launched many years ago, so how about a PlayStation 5 launch title? While it may only be 5 years old, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone to say anything impressive about Godfall, if anything at all.
I mean, to be fair, it was like really shiny, like shinier than Shine Down. Remember Shine Down? Shine Up? Shine Sideways? It's shining all over the place, really. You know, back you go.
Godfall had some serious heft behind it, being published by the Borderlands developer Gearbox. Set in a high fantasy world with sci-fi elements, Godfall featured melee combat with loot collection. Like a looter shooter, but a looter slasher? That'll do. Being a PS5 launch title, Godfall had gorgeous graphics and combat effects. Despite its gorgeous looks, the combat was repetitive and lacked depth, as did Godfall's loot-based progression. The story was lackluster, and there was little to do after completing the main story, and despite being largely single-player, Godfall had an annoying always-online requirement. The biggest issue with Godfall that it was just so bleh. I mean to say it was very bland and never really had a true identity. Who was this game for? And the $70 price tag didn't help matters. The PS5 also had a better choice of games to play at launch too, with the likes of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and the Demon's Souls remake all being better choices to spend your hard-earned cash on. Word of mouth was almost non-existent, and the lack of post-launch content really helped to confine Godfall to the dustbin of forgotten launch games. And that's all we've got time for today. I hope you enjoyed our selection. I picked it especially for you. Surprisingly, there's not too many forgotten launch games out there. I suppose at launch any game has got at least a few players playing it that will always remember it fondly, even if it's not so good. But how about yourself? Do you have any launch games that you enjoyed that others have seemingly forgotten? Why not let us know down in the comments? Let yourself be heard, don't be ashamed. Put it out there. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us, you know, and we can continue making great content. Anyway, that's all from me. Sling your hook, at least until next time.